Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of global legal law firm, ISOs, fintech, PayFacs, agents, merchants, processors, acquiring banks, and card brands. If these terms mean something to you, this podcast is for you. If these terms aren't so familiar, this podcast is even more for you. We hope you enjoy this episode of PEP, the Payments Experts Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast. Really excited today. We're going to be discussing international payments law and advising. We're very fortunate to have in studio with us Senior Associate Attorney Jarvis Lagman, as well as, and I hope I don't butcher your name, Victoria, Victoria Soltesz.
That's right.
Is that correct? Victoria
Exactly.
is with PSP Angels, Payment Service Providers Angels. Victoria, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you guys do?
Sure thing. Thank you very much for having me on this amazing podcast. And I would like to say that I'm very honored to be able to speak about my profession. My name is Victoria Soltesz, and I'm the founder of PSP Angels. I actually started off my career as an accountant, tax advisor back in the days. I was living in Cyprus, and we set up different tax structures. We helped all companies to set up different onshore and offshore structures, tax optimization, obviously opening bank accounts for them. So this is my background. And I gained quite a lot of companies. I advised to them how to move funds, obviously, internationally. And that's when the big question came, when compliance started to be a burden. Is that I understand, Victoria, that yes, the tax can be optimized, but how are we making sure that the banks are also happy with what we are doing? And there was more and more problems getting accepted, mainly when we are talking about online companies or offshore setups. The banks started to be a bit iffy with these kind of setups. And I found myself more and more dealing with the banking side of the business and moving funds and clarifying transactions for the banks other than optimizing tax. So that was the whole idea when I started to see that there could be a good opportunity on the market to explain how banks think. Just justify why we cannot do certain transactions. What is high risk when it comes to online payments, obviously? Because I noticed that back at the day, mainly when the compliance started, it was a whole blur. Nobody really knew anything. The prices were completely subjective. I know you, I take you. I don't know you, I don't risk my license because of you. So it was a bit of a mess. And when we started PSP Angels, I remember we started off in an Excel sheet with, the vertical, we had the clients, and then the horizontal is the different banks and the payment service providers. And wherever the Excel sheet hit each other on the cell, we saw that that bank is rejecting, that client is accepted, what are the fees and whatnot. That happened actually 6 years ago. And now we developed to an international company. We have more than 2,500 clients. We are not only doing the matchmaking with finding merchant accounts and bank accounts for these online businesses, but also setting up the different structures internationally from the payment perspective. So, of course, I'm still using my financial background to help them on the taxation, but also mainly focusing on where the money comes from, how much, how often, what currency, explaining to them why it's not a good idea to keep millions and millions on one bank account. How is it going to affect you if they go bankrupt? And overall, just make sense of this whole online payment blur, as I said. So right now, we started also consulting to financial institutions, brokers, e-money institutions, banks, how to optimize their correspondent connections, international bank transfers, and also how to optimize their portfolio when it comes to high risk versus low risk, how high risk is high risk, what is the actual risk which is posing on the operation. So yes, we've got a lot of things to do.
We have a lot to talk
And
about.
everything is yes, and everything is always changing all the time.
Absolutely.
But it's a creative work, let's say, and
Right.
it's good to see what works and what doesn't.
Really quick, because I know Jarvis has a lot of questions, and I'm not going to jump on top of that, but I do want to tell a quick story, which I think is telling. This happened just the other day, literally a couple of days ago. So we had a potential client contact our firm, and he was a Hong Kong-based business. He was interested in advisement on English and Wales law related to payments, which is why he reached out to us. Well, I connected him with Victoria.
Yeah.
It turns out he emailed back 5-10 minutes later. He says, I already work and know Victoria. How great is that?
Yeah.
So Victoria, you are not exaggerating. Payments is a small world in some ways, and also shows, how well your business is doing. And that was really a cool instance that happened.
That's right. It's a small business. Everybody knows everyone. And when we are talking about mainly high risk payment service providers, we see the same faces coming back to us on the different business names as well. So it's also adding a bit of, spice to the whole industry. But as I said, it's very exciting. There are a lot of innovations, a lot of new ideas, a lot of new technologies. So yeah, that's definitely keeping us busy.
So how does the European Union regulations impact the underwriting of these merchant accounts and essentially how all the different actors in the industry, like what was the difference with pre-regulation and post-regulation? Did the regulations actually change or help, or is it just an additional compliance feature?
I think to reply to this question, we need to go back and understand why the regulation is getting harder and harder. And as I can see, it's not only in Europe, but everywhere in the world. So if you think about it, when you're a country, your biggest motivation is to keep people paying taxes, obviously, to maintain a healthy society. So if you see that there is an opportunity for tax evasion or bringing your business, mainly when we are talking about online businesses, which are more and more popular nowadays, taking it offshore or taking out of the jurisdiction where the person should actually pay taxes, you should stop it. Now, obviously, countries cannot go to different countries and say that, hey, country B, I am country A and I don't like how you're taxing. Let's do something else. So the only weapon, let's say, a control tool in their hand is to regulate the banking connections. And that's what we see when we are going deep down in the banking sanctions. So there are certain countries which are sanctioned. So you are no longer playing with us kind of attitude. The lighter version is the anti-money laundering, the anti-tax avoidance rules, and all those kind of know your customer, know your business kind of checks, which are intended to limit those kind of, let's say, wrongdoings. It's not necessarily illegal to take your money offshore and run an offshore company, but good luck finding a bank account for that. So as a rule of thumb, European Union introduced a kind of common understanding that if you are a person who is sitting in, let's say, Germany, you are breathing German air, you are serving German customers, or even if your business is online, but you are actually using the German infrastructure and housing and whatnot benefits, you should actually pay German taxes. So you cannot run a company, let's say, in Cyprus, where the taxation is better. So that means that you have to pay taxes where you sit because the management and control of your company is at that given jurisdiction, at that given country. So that means that if you are within the European Union, you can only run your company basically within the European Union. Otherwise, you will never be able to find a bank. Even if you find a bank outside of the EU, good luck bringing the money back to the European Union through the, justifying the source of funds and whatnot. So if you have a European regulated payment institution or European regulated bank, as a rule of thumb, they can only take an EU company, European Union company, with an EU director, within EU traffic, serving European clients. And of course, if the company needs a license, it has to be an EU license as well. So many times we see, for example, a Hong Kong company is trying to apply for a merchant account with a European regulated acquiring bank. They will not succeed because the European regulator says, EU company, EU director, EU traffic, if you don't fulfill those, unfortunately, we are not allowed to give you a merchant account.
So what's the drawbacks for that? Because I feel like on the one hand, in America, I guess the idea that you express would be something known as minimum contacts, right? So to the extent that a company has minimum contacts to the jurisdiction in the United States, it will be subject to United States law. So it sounds like it's a very parallel, I guess, legal doctrine that governs how your European countries or EU countries, I guess, assert jurisdiction over these companies, and a way to ensure that would be to require a stronger contact to the jurisdiction, right? That they need to be EU citizen and have stronger EU ties, so a foreign company couldn't use EU infrastructure, use EU banks to be able to do these kinds of transactions. I mean, what's the negative in terms of that approach, right? Because you'd think that you'd want some of the capital from these places to migrate into the EU to enrich the Eurozone, right? So you're kind of foreclosing capital kind of coming into the country, which could be used to help develop commerce and build up society, have a healthy society. So as much as anti-money laundering and fraud and and making sure that all these transactions are above board, although that's one very important virtue. Another important virtue is just to get the money into the country and then see what we're going to do with it, and make sure that once the money's here, now we can actually regulate it, as opposed to putting up a wall and saying the money can't even come in.
Exactly. And actually what you're referring to, we call it substance. Mm-hmm. So the substance is when you are running your company from a certain jurisdiction. Now it's getting harder and harder because nowadays there are digital nomads. Everybody's traveling everywhere. Mm-hmm. I'm working 2 months in Bali. I'm working 2 months in Germany. The rest of the time I'm spending in whatever Hawaii. The rule of thumb usually is, where are you a tax resident? That means that that's where you live. Therefore, that's where you're running your business from. And I have to highlight that we are talking about online businesses, because mm-hmm. if you have a brick and mortar business, where is your office? Where are your employees? Where are you selling your products? With services, with online businesses, it's always a bit, because mainly when you're international, your clients are international, it's very hard to pinpoint where is actually the tax jurisdiction of that business. Mm-hmm. So what we say usually is that where you have your substance, many times they are asking for a utility bill, because that means that if you're paying water or if you're paying electricity, that means that you are using a property, and that's why your tax jurisdiction is there. The management and control is exercised from that very jurisdiction. Therefore, that's why you have to pay your taxes there. Now, obviously, people try to be clever. No one likes to pay taxes unless they have to. So we have millions of times requests when people start to out-clever the system, and they say that, I figure it all out. I'm setting up an offshore company. I'm doing online business. I'm providing consulting services. I set up a business in Panama. I set up a business in British Virgin Islands, or any other jurisdiction where the tax obviously is zero and there are no bookkeeping requirements. So mm-hmm. everything is easy. The problem starts when these people want to actually get a bank account or a merchant account with a well-known, well-established bank who should not support this kind of system. Mm-hmm. And when I'm asking them that, hey, why did you set up a company in Panama? The answer, because I'm paying less tax, obviously, is not a good answer. So you should not actually justify and say that is the reason why you set up that company in a certain jurisdiction. Many times we see this in a smaller scale in Europe, because there are different taxation between European countries. So the tax in Germany is higher than the tax, let's say, in Cyprus or in Malta. Needless to say that countries want to increase the foreign investment in a country, mainly when the country doesn't have anything else to offer. So when we are talking about small countries, small islands like Cyprus or Malta, they don't necessarily have a very strong infrastructure for agriculture or any kind of like industry, but they are very good with financial services. So that's what they want to improve. So they give a lot of tax incentives and government support for foreign investors. Now, it's all good until you are actually moving to the country, and whatever you are earning, you're spending within the country, and that justifies why you're paying less taxes because you give back to the society. The problem starts when you are just taking advantage of the jurisdiction without actually being there. So when you're sitting in Germany, as I said in the previous example, if you're sitting in Germany and you're using German roads and you're going to a German shop to buy your food, why are you taking the tax money out, and why are you paying the taxes in Cyprus or in Malta? Even though that you're still within European jurisdiction, that could be questionable. And I've seen banks and financial institutions having even sometimes mind-bending questions like, why is your phone number? Because in Europe, every phone number is different based on which country that mobile provider is issuing the SIM card from. Why is your mobile number is in I don't know, in Lithuania when your business is in Italy? And even though that you say that, hey, in Europe we don't have borders, I can actually sit in my car and drive around, and I can use any kind of mobile provider because there are no roaming expenses. They still need to pinpoint the jurisdiction of your company and exercise all those rules and regulations for your company, including taxes, which are relevant to that jurisdiction. And it's the banks and financial institutions' responsibility. Obviously, government cannot be anywhere, so that's why they give financial licenses to these companies, that they are shifting the responsibility that you check it. You are responsible if everything is going well because you are the one who are handling the funds. And of course, these financial institutions have no other opportunity than check all the transactions, incoming, outgoing, KYC checks, know your customer, KYB checks, know your business, keeping records on the files, onboarding. So it's a lot of administration burden, which obviously increases the fees as well for banking fees, which ends up on the client. But yeah, it's a different subject. Basically, the banks are responsible to make sure that no tax avoidance, obviously no money laundering is happening within their business, their operation.
So a lot of what I guess a lot of these regulations are focused on essentially card not present transactions that are online, where there isn't a brick and mortar, or there isn't a place where you can actually demonstrably point to why you have jurisdiction other than the affiliate or the principal's residence. Is that kind of what you're getting at in terms of how the regulatory burden has kind of shifted in focus?
Exactly, and it's very complicated because when you're selling something online, mainly when we are talking about services, it's very hard to justify that the sale took place. So, for example, there is an Instagram influencer, and you're sending donation to that person. The bank only sees incoming transactions in small amounts from individuals, as high risk as it gets. So, of course, when the bank wants to justify, where are you getting all these payments? Well, people like me and they send me money, and now I became a millionaire. The bank's responsibility to make sure that all those funds which are hitting the account of that Instagram influencer is not only coming from legit sources, are taxed, and it shows on the individual's tax return, so the source of funds is declared. Because if even one transaction is going through, which could come from a sanctioned country or any other ways of like a non-tax income, it is going to be the responsibility and of course the penalty for that financial institution to allow that transaction. So it doesn't get any more high risk than it gets. Or, for example, there was another example. I have a good friend in Cyprus. He's over 60 years old, and all his life he was dealing with shipping activities. So low risk shipping, banking, and shipping insurance. And he called me one day and he told me that, hey, Victoria, I know that you're very active in blockchain and you know what's Bitcoin. Imagine I did the same. I actually went to the crypto exchange. I bought $500 worth of Bitcoin and I did it well. And a couple of weeks later, I cashed out 550. So I made $50 profit on it. Now, the problem started when he actually cashed out in fiat, traditional money, on his bank account, this $550. So the bank obviously put him on a high alert that, wow, this individual has crypto-related transaction. We cannot filter out if this crypto has been taxed. Is it covering a legit, activity? Is it coming from legit sources? It's not some kind of drug money. And unfortunately, they put my friend on a very high risk category, which increased his mortgage, his business loan, not only his personal finances costs just went up to the roof. The whole company, when he was a business owner and the director, and the whole shipping company for a couple of years was on actually a higher risk category for the eyes of the bank, regardless of the 20, 30-year connection, simply because of one transaction.
Or not even for 50
exactly.
bucks.
The $50 difference. So banks are having a very hard time to filter out these transactions. All the responsibility is with them. If they don't comply, they get the penalty. So of course they are anal about everything.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, when you're trying to run your business, it might not be understandable that how comes that I cannot control my own money, I cannot spend my own money however I want, and why do I have to report back everything to the bank? So it's a very paradox situation at the moment. Let's see what the future holds.
But so in your opinion, would you say that European financial institutions are more risk averse than their American counterparts? Because I don't know if you've been following the news, right, with like Silicon Valley Bank, where, the bank itself was engaging in crypto transactions, right?
Exactly. What I know is that the regulator is definitely stricter and the penalties can come easier. Therefore, I would say that, yes, there are certain banks who are more risk averse. But if you think about it, how high risk is high risk to a bank or a financial institution? So if you have a bank, right, you are having a lot of low risk customers, domestic clients, supermarkets, shoe shops, everything is vanilla. Life is good. So the person, obviously, you're running a financial institution, you're not a charity, you need to create some profit, right? So the shareholders are coming to the bank and they say that, guys, we need to make some profit. How are you going to make some profit? It's such a supply-oriented market that you cannot really increase your fees because all your customers are just going to the competition. So what are you going to do? You talk to your risk guy and you ask the risk guy that, hey, how can we earn more money? Well, we need to take more risk. More money is obviously, coming with more risk. So what can we do? Well, I think we can start onboarding a bit more risky customers. Okay, what do you think about? Introduce gambling, introduce licensed operations, funds, asset management, introduce maybe adult entertainment, which is actually the product is not high risk, but the reputational damage could be, but,
and plus there are regulations concerning the operation of the business that generate risk, right? What if they're underage, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or introduce, for example, crypto. So what do we need to do for that? Well, we need to get a person who is understanding the whole market in the compliance department. So if I trust my compliance and my compliance have experience with these kind of verticals, we are looking like we are taking the risk. We can increase the financial product prices for those kind of verticals and we are going to make money. So this is what we see many, many times. And we don't even, like us, like normal human walking on the street, we don't even understand how banks think. But this could be the reason why one day the bank is accepting your business, the other day is rejecting you. One day they say that, okay, we are making a lot of money, and another day they are losing money. So there are a lot of decisions happening at the background, not even mentioning the connections between international bank accounts. So for example, Silicon Valley Bank was the correspondent account of one European bank. How do I know? What do I care as a customer? I don't know what are the transactions of my bank, what are the internal decisions of my bank. However, it does affect my funds. It does affect how my bank is actually safekeeping my funds and even investing my money in certain financial products, which then can go down. So it's a very complicated subject. Yes, the banking is like a spider net. Everything is related to everywhere. So even if you just have a little disturbance on one end, it can actually spread and affect everyone globally, like what we see, for example, in 2008 when the banking crisis just took over the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's very hard to predict that how your banking connections will be in the future. Even if you don't consider yourself a risky business, maybe the bank will. So if you're a startup, for example, you can end up on a high risk category. My friend can be high risk because of the one crypto transaction. And you just don't know sometimes how the bank is going to react to your business, to your independent.
So would you say that each bank's underwriting policies are both A, unique to the bank, and B, not very transparent?
Well, it's definitely not transparent to the open public.
Yeah.
What the bank is doing internally, okay, maybe if you're doing massive research and you're getting into documents, but usually it's not even a public information that what drove a risk decision, what drove the decision to accept or reject a client. Now, I'm going even further. The bank does not even have to give a reason why they are rejecting you or why they are closing an account on you. Many times we see absolutely personal decision. Ooh, I don't like him. Or adverse media. What is adverse media? Why? I've got one person who doesn't like me, write a bad article about me. I'm adverse media.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of subjective element in this question, which is very hard to approach. And for us, like normal people who are having money in the bank, of course, we don't know how that bank is handling our money, right? Why would we? Why do we even care? And that's why we put our trust in the license.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say that, for all of the increased amount of regulatory activity governing the banking system, that maybe the regulation should also focus on creating transparency in underwriting? Right, that there should be some kind of standardization in terms of how banks arrive at an underwriting decision. Because I feel like what ends up happening, at least in the United States, right, is that, some of these underwriting decisions get decided by leverage, right? It's like, you go to the bank and say, well, if you want us to put $5 million in your bank, maybe you do what we tell you to do. That happens here, right? Because at the end of the day, right, when the bank does the cost benefit analysis, yes, they may be taking on risk, but there's more money in the reserve account of the bank if you do the deal, right? So I think there are ways to generate leverage that are even outside of even like a bank's underwriting decision that they would make in a vacuum, right? Because going back to your essential point, right? It also seems that banks can treat different customers differently based on how appealing that customer is to them, and that feels fundamentally unfair.
Yeah, and very subjective as well. And as I said, many times it happens that the compliance officer who is working at that department has an experience with that vertical or not. I know for a fact that there was a financial institution who had no clue about crypto. What the management decided, guys, we are opening up for crypto. What do we need? a couple of people who understand what is blockchain, how is crypto transactions working, and can filter out the scams, at least on a basic level. They introduced a couple of new compliance officers in the compliance department. They took on some crypto clients, obviously charging them a lot, right? This is what justifies that move. And they become crypto-friendly bank. And they were very, very successful. So it is a lot of personal touch on that side as well. And there is a lot of subjective decision, which even though that you are making it transparent, for us as everyday people, it might not really mean a lot, because even if I think that, okay, my money is in the bank and there is not even a 10% reserve, which is covering my funds at the moment, I'm still investing that money. I'm still keeping it with a financial institution, even though that it goes against every kind of like logical decision, right? Yeah. Why would I do that?
Well, because I think at some level you trust institutions, right? There's an inherent, because at the end of the day, as an individual consumer, as an individual person, you have your lane that you need to focus on. You have to trust that everybody else is doing their job in the way you expect them to. And to the extent that those expectations depart from the reality, I think that's where a lot of this friction comes from.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, I guess maybe a follow-up question, because I feel like over the course of my practice here in the United States doing a lot of the payments processing work, and I definitely appreciate you giving us an understanding of how the banking relationships work. So we work a lot here with Visa, MasterCard. I believe there's another payment card company that's very prevalent in Europe. For the life of me, I can't remember what it is. But I mean, so what impact do those companies have on how everybody organizes their transactions from merchants up to the financial institution?
Well, they are the ones who are actually making a decision. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, there was a hiccup in Pornhub, and Visa and MasterCard withdrew their support to Pornhub. And that's when we really saw a spike in crypto prices going up, because they use that as an alternative payment. But what I'm trying to say is that Visa and MasterCard is so big that they can write their own rules. And that's why we are talking about Visa and MasterCard schemes and regulations. And obviously, you have to play by their rule if you want to get a piece of the pie. So if you are not fitting into their merchant code, they simply don't deal with you. And when we are talking about high-risk clients, they are so minuscule in percentage that sometimes it doesn't even worth for Visa and MasterCard to even consider them. Therefore, the bank is rather rejecting them than taking the risk on. But in the same time, what we see to balance out the monopoly situation of these giants, there are a lot of alternative payment methods, mainly on the emerging markets. In Africa, for example, we see a mobile payment method. When you are not you don't have an opportunity to access the banking system, what you do, you go to the village, you top up your mobile phone, you've got some minutes, and this is basically the value what you're exchanging with your mates. So you're going to the local pub or a bar. How much is this beer? It's 2 minutes. So they many times they are using it as a form of payment because it's free, because it's cheap, because it's immediate to transfer. But we can go, for example, to Southeast Asia. They are very, very popular in their own payment methods. Indonesia is very popular for the QR codes. Everybody's paying with that. When you're going to Japan, you've got certain different payment methods, wallets. Venus Pay, for example, or Philippines, you've got the Dragon Pay. Every jurisdiction has their own use tested and preferred payment method. Now, our job comes in when a client would like to go international and they say that, okay, I nailed Visa and MasterCard, let's go to South America and I would like to offer my services or products there. And they think that with Visa and MasterCard, they can enter the Venezuelan market. Now, clearly, we know what happened in Venezuela. People don't have not even just cards, but the whole Venezuelan financial system is in shambles. So if you would like to target areas with Visa and MasterCard, when people just don't have access to Visa and MasterCard, that's when you're using alternative payment methods. Now, this should be the reason why alternative payments come across. But nowadays, what we see is that merchants and online companies are using alternative payment methods many times to actually spare some money on Visa and MasterCard fees, because we know that interchange can be very pricey. So if you are using the whatever wallet, you get an extra discount. If you are sending me I don't know, the mobile payment, the minute, I can actually calculate that in my price. And many times we see that some companies are working with a very small profit margin, 0.5%, 1%, which is Visa, MasterCard interchange fee, even higher, 1.5%, can make a lot of difference for their profitability. And that's why they are reaching out to alternative payment methods.
So, I mean, and I understand that, and a lot of, even just in my own free time, I've been thinking about what is the value of Visa, MasterCard? What are they actually presenting other than marketing and, and branding and things like that?
We've had this conversation, Jarvis, yeah.
And one of the things I thought of was a lot of it is creating protocols for handling disputes, right? So, my issue with essentially like crypto transactions is, okay, you get instantaneous settlement. What happens in the event of a chargeback or a dispute, right? I think, under Visa, MasterCard, there is a process for being able to arbitrate that dispute, resolve it, and then funds get transferred or either credited or debited based on the resolution of that process. Whereas I see in a lot of these other alternative payment systems where they don't have as sophisticated of a dispute resolution process. What is the remedy for the users, in the event that there's a dispute over payments?
I feel that not that many people know about chargeback. If we are considering the public, right? So if you're going down the street and you're knocking on someone's shoulder and asking the person, hey, do you know what's the chargeback? Chances are, okay, maybe in the States it could be different, but in Europe,
I think we're very litigious here. I think maybe that's the difference.
Chargebacks are a major issue in the United States.
Yeah, but if you're going to Indonesia, if you're going to, I don't know, in Hungary, people don't really know about it. So I know my mother still doesn't want to use her card online because she thinks that they're going to copy the code, they're going to empty her account, and all over, if they don't deliver what she paid for, the money is lost forever. So it's that's the highest risk it ever gets. And then I had to explain to her that, no, there is a chargeback method. And it was absolutely a surprise for her. And if my mom's generation doesn't know about it, trust me, my generation, many times, they don't know about it. And we are not talking about US, we are talking about Europe, we are talking about emerging markets, Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. They don't even have a car, let alone this kind of knowledge about these kind of systems. So that's where we see that the alternative payment methods are giving more benefit than actually downfall. And many times it's just easier, it's quicker for them. So I agree with you.
Yeah, but they don't have but I guess it's more of a cultural thing where
that's right.
People honor the transaction at the point of payment, and they never really return back to the transaction dispute. I didn't get my goods back, or I didn't, because I think, for instance, whenever I'm like negotiating some of these merchant agreements, a lot of it comes down to who's going to be responsible for these, these merchant losses, right? And, and I feel like a lot of even the American financial system kind of builds in a little bit for fraud and losses related to fraud. Right. So, and I think it's a different approach than the European Union, because I think the European Union in its, I guess the ideal would be zero fraud, right? Like, okay, we're just going to make rules and we're going to structure transactions in a way where people are not going to be able to commit fraud, because everybody's going to have some kind of tie to the jurisdiction. And if you commit fraud, we're going to hunt you down because we know where you live and we can get you. Just correct me if I'm wrong.
Should be, yeah.
Whereas I think in America, it's a little bit more laissez-faire, where it's like, okay, we don't know where you are, but we think that we're going to make so much money from having a laissez-faire approach to these transactions that at the end of the day, yes, even though there's going to be losses associated with these high-risk behaviors, right, we're going to make more money because the volume of transactions will be so much greater. So I think that's maybe some difference in approach between these systems, just more thematically. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Completely. And the thing is that we don't even have to go to Visa and MasterCard chargeback procedure. You just need to ask your friends. What was the last time that you actually studied your bank statement? Do you know what was that bank transaction on this, paper 2 pages ago? Do you know that? Chances are they will not know that. So
people wouldn't even know
that's
about their recurring authorizations. I'm sure that they actually
there
looked
you
at their
go.
bank statement and
Exactly.
it's like, oh, I'm still paying for that. I
Exactly.
signed up for that. And then, they double the price
Exactly.
on that, So even the idea that consumers aren't aware of recurring authorizations and their ability to withdraw consent for those with authorizations, right?
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
some of this is,
You
I feel like a lot of these companies are making money off of people's ignorance.
That's
Um,
right. That's what the whole subscription model is made for.
yeah,
If you think about it, yeah.
right.
But that's what we see here as well. That people don't know about it. Of course, you're always gonna get the friendly fraud. You're always gonna get the smart people who try to outsmart the system and charge back things. But it's not the majority. So if you're thinking about it, if you're selling on a large scale, sometimes it's just easier to just say to the chargeback, yeah, just give it back to them. Like, for example, how Amazon does it. Oh, you don't like the color? Fine, don't even send it back. Just $10, who cares? Because it's cheaper, easier than I start an investigation file for every single chargeback and try to fight it back. And in this way, yes, I agree with you. Visa and MasterCard is amazing because it gives you kind of security. How many people are actually using it? It's the same as travel insurance. How many people are actually paying for it? How many is actually using it? So there are the ideological aspect of payments, and there is a practical one. So
Yeah.
of course, if you're, you need to consider both.
Oh no, and I think so much of what's interesting about even speaking with you about learning more about not even just the European payment system, but also the European payments culture, is that I feel like the culture actually informs how the payments are structured, right? Because it isn't
Always.
very litigious, because it's also
Always.
very like detail oriented, associated with, for instance, you at the very beginning of the podcast, you talked about how, the point of taxes is to enrich the society that you live in. That's not a very American way of thinking about
I hadn't heard that in a
taxes.
while. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you, right? That and I think because you live and operate so internationally, especially being in the EU, where if you think about the United States, imagine if the United States was a decentralized, federalized society like Europe, where people in California speak a different language than people in Arizona. Even though we have open borders, we have different cultures.
Yeah, 50 countries instead of
Right.
50 states.
Yeah, so I think what ends up happening in America is we're so homogenized that we don't think internationally, even though we have some of the same features of an international confederated system, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, you're sitting on a huge market. Everybody speaks the same language. More or less, the regulation is the same. Okay, maybe taxes differ from state to state. But if you think about it, in Europe, everybody is killing everyone for thousands of years. Everybody hates everyone.
Yeah.
The language is not consistent.
Well, I mean, and it's
We
less
eat
than 100 years
different
old, right?
food.
The EU is what, 30 years old,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, so the idea that it's going to, I guess actually a follow-up question. So what did Brexit do to this whole, to how payments operated, and what kind of negotiations do you have with? Because I remember Jeremy mentioned a Wales bank. So how does a Wales bank, deal with an English bank post Brexit?
Well, it shaped the system because for many years we didn't know what's going to happen. So no one really wanted to touch anything. Don't rock the boat because we don't know.
I know
where
the entire country is high risk.
Yeah, exactly. So we just didn't know what to do. Accept them, don't accept them, advise them to start a new company somewhere else. So in the middle of the complete blur and confusion, what happened is that many companies said that, okay, I'm not going to wait out what's going to happen. They started a new company in moved to different jurisdiction. But how it affected the financial system is that now UK license cannot be passported in EU or with certain restrictions. So if you had a UK financial license, you might not be able to use it anymore for the rest of the EU, and it's vice versa. You might not use your European license to serve UK customers. Now, is it clear? Still not very clear. So there are still a lot of like open questions. It did affect we call it value-added tax, VAT. You guys call it GST. How these countries are dealing with each other taxation-wise. But, and it's only my personal opinion, now UK is in a very privileged position of being very close to EU, having a lot of connections to the EU, however, having a different currency, and it's not under a European regulator anymore. So it is a lot of opportunity for UK to play their cards right and could emerge as a new Switzerland using their very privileged position in the financial market to offer those very unique financial services, which could not be otherwise possible under an EU license. But
so they could take on more risk than EU member
for
countries.
Example.
Right.
For example, but if you think about it, the only thing that you need to think of, they don't have euro, and pound is still a very strong currency. So even if you are not really breaking your neck on the risk part, on the foreign exchange, you're already making a lot of money just by playing your cards right and dealing with another currency or currencies within EU. Based on your own very strong currency, which is the pound.
That's actually very interesting. So, do you think in the long run Brexit would be a good thing?
Well, every negative can be turned into positive if you know what you're doing. So obviously, time will tell.
Do you think they know what they're doing? I think that's the
situation. But the opportunity is definitely there. So yes, we are advising to a couple of financial institutions in the UK coming up with new product and new services. And the other thing is very interesting in the UK that they are very innovative when it comes to technology. So they were the first one who introduced open banking, for example. Open banking is something similar than you guys have, for example, Venmo, right? But with a twist is that you can connect your bank account to this open banking layer, and you communicate sending money through this layer. So the banks are contacted to each other through API, through the technology, but you have an application as a front end, and you can send money, accept money to each other, and it doesn't really matter where you're banking, who is your banking provider, they are all connected to this open banking layer. Now, it came up with the UK first. The good thing is that there is no more KYC when you're opening a new account or any kind of questions from the bank, because everything is running on a closed loop system, so everybody trusts everyone, so no question of source of funds, no question of where the money moves. So you can actually give authorization to financial institutions to have an access to your bank account, reading your spending habits, reading your past purchases, which could allow a lot of new technological advancements, and it all originated from the UK, and it's a beautiful thing. So UK is very, very advanced on this.
So in the United States, a lot of those, for instance, those technology companies who sit in the middle of those transactions, they would be considered either money transmitters or payment facilitators here in the United States, who are actually very regulated. Is there the similar kind of regulation for those technology companies that develop the APIs and the platforms that enable the banking to banking relationship?
Could be approached from two different perspectives. If you're actually holding funds on behalf of a third party, you have to have a financial license. You have to report back to the tax office. Oh, I can see that Jeremy has $1 million, but he didn't declare it on the tax return, kind of thing.
1.5 actually.
But in this way, if you're ever touching funds of someone else or holding funds on behalf of third party, even for a broken second, you have to have a financial license.
Okay. So it's actually a little bit more like Zelle.
No. Something like that, but the whole idea is that if I can cheat my tax return and not declare my income because my money is in your pocket, you have the responsibility to report it back to the office, tax office on behalf of me. So that's the financial license. But if you're acting as a technology provider, a middleware between the bank and the client, for example, gateways, or connecting bank to bank through like open banking, you can get away by not having the license because you are technically having no hold of funds. You are not owning any money at any given moment. You are just a middleware, a gateway, a connection technologically where the information is flowing through. You only need the security standard, and that's it.
Yeah,
so
and you're basically operating as an agent of the bank, of the financial institution. So there needs to be some kind of like contract between the financial institution and the technology provider.
Well, obviously contract, but more importantly, the technological connection, the API, that how this information is moving. So, for example, you want to send some money to Jeremy, it goes through me. I am not touching the funds, so your bank is actually contacted by Jeremy's bank, and you are making the transaction, but through my platform. Yeah, for example, a marketplace, like you never touch the product, but you are just like connecting parties. There, you don't need a license.
Because we have a lot of clients, even here at the firm, that offer those kinds of gateway solutions. And, and I'm actually just really interested in what opportunities are there, to port some of this technology over to, the EU, just because, it's something that we do, it might need to be structured differently. And I'm not sure how these technology solutions actually are able to onboard new banks, right? So I'm assuming that maybe they have a sales engine and they're going to different banks and saying, look at our API, do you want to be part of our network? And they're developing their own internal network, not that dissimilar from Visa, MasterCard, right? Because if you actually think about what Visa, MasterCard is, it really is an association of banks, right? And so what are these technology platforms trying to do? They're trying to create their own association of banks.
That's right. And that, as I said, you can even start it from your own bedroom. It doesn't need a lot of development even further. You can always white label something out. It's up to your negotiations how much is going to be the setup fee and the running fee. It can be a couple of €1,000. So it's not a big investment. All you need is a PCI DSS compliance, which is a security standard that you are not holding anyone's card details or name or address. So it's like a data protection kind of thing. But other than that, you can act as a gateway, as a payment facilitator. The only trick, really, as I said at the beginning, are you holding funds or not? If yes, you need a license. If not, free to go. Just comply with the data protection law and the security standards, and that's it, really.
Victoria, something I think we might be coming here towards the end of this podcast. One, you have a wealth of knowledge, and I was hearing during this conversation, we could probably, and I'm sure we will, we'd be happy to have you back. We can have other conversations. I'd be happy to hear about who's the ideal client that, are most likely our predominantly American audience listening to this podcast. Who's the type of client that should reach out to you?
Who want to go international, who already have an online business, service or product, but they don't really know how to reach out to new jurisdictions, who to trust, which bank account to open, how to hedge the currencies with the new bank, how to negotiate better fees, what are the different payment methods that they need to pay attention in certain jurisdictions. So I would say that everybody needs, nowadays in 2023, I would say definitely everyone who has an online presence and online payment, you will need a payment consultant. If it's not PSP angels, obviously cannot be everywhere, you will need someone who understands this market inside out. And where I see the biggest problem is that there is no qualification that can prove that, yes, I know what I'm talking about. I know what is Visa and MasterCard. I know what is the chargeback. So you do need someone with a lot of knowledge and experience to be able to handle your funds accordingly. And I just tell you a very funny story. I had a client who was doing online gambling services, slot machines online, and they wanted to go to a new jurisdiction. They spent millions to get the local license. They got ready with everything, and they opened up in a new country. The problem was that after spending a lot of marketing budget, turns out that all the payment providers who are taking gambling are very, very expensive and very shady. So many times it's not do the marketing, get the license, sort out everything legally, and then find a payment service provider and the local bank for that. But nowadays, what I see, you need to see this in a completely opposite way. Talk to your payment provider, see who is the local bank who can support your money, which is basically the lifeline of your business. Get engaged with that financial institution, find out what they need to onboard you as a client, and then spend the money on lawyers, license, and marketing and whatnot to actually penetrate the market. So when it comes to online business, now the tables have turned, and you will need someone who is helping you in this journey, because sometimes it takes much more time and energy to figure it out on your own and learn from your own mistakes than go to a consultancy company, consult a couple of hours, clear-cut understanding, what are you allowed to do, what is the fee, and then you can spare a lot of money and time for yourself.
Something I want to give you guys the last word on, but I think it'll be an interesting prompt. Victoria, you and I were talking the other day, and you mentioned firms like Global Legal Law Firm don't seem to really exist much in Europe in terms of we are a payments litigation firm, right? We are kind of expertise in the payment space, particularly as a law firm. Would you guys talk about that? Maybe why that's not the case over there and why it is here?
Good question. Why not? I don't know, because obviously legal perspective is something different than the payment perspective. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not running a law firm. I know more or less what are the requirements, but I'm not the one who is signing it off and saying that, yes, this is it. I can guide you and help you to find the relevant law firms and ask the relevant questions. But in my opinion, there would be a huge need for these kind of services, combination with the payment consulting services globally, for this exact reason what I just mentioned.
Because for instance, one of the things you mentioned was the idea that, some of these payments processors, for instance, like gambling and things like that, are, shady or unscrupulous. And this is why you need a law firm, right? If you're a merchant and, and you have an agreement, and then all of a sudden you send all sorts of funds to, to the processor, and they don't give you the funds back. That's why you have a law firm, because they they find the people, they hunt them down, and they sue them, right? So some of I think what some of the risks that you're actually describing in terms of, I think you do some of the front end in terms of how can you structure your business in a way to mitigate your risk. And I think a lot of what we do as litigators here at Global Legal Law Firm is that, okay, the risk happened, everything that you feared happened, what do you do now? And that's something that I think we can help you with.
And not only at the end, but at the beginning as well with the planning.
Absolutely.
Because whatever justifies the law might not justify the bank. So you can be absolutely legal and to the book and to the dot. The banks yet are not going to take you simply because of the vertical. For example, what we mentioned, adult services. You are legal. You're doing everything as per your lawyer advice. Or, for example, taking your business offshore. There's nothing wrong with it. You are not doing a criminal activity. Yet, good luck to find a payment provider. So in this way, what I see a huge need is the payment consultant talking to the lawyer and coming up with a structure together, using both of the knowledge and expertise to help the client go really global and enter all those jurisdictions, which could be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, even something to the extent, because I remember you brought up the situation of, okay, you organize a business in Panama. Right? Are there member sponsor banks in Panama that are willing to open an account, and then you could set up some kind of royalty arrangement where you're doing transfers that way, where all of the merchant activities being funneled to your Panamanian account, but then you actually get paid out as like a royalty to your European account or something like that, right? I mean, I think there are ways to actually structure these transactions, not necessarily in a way to do tax avoidance, but in a way to optimize your tax, how money comes in the most tax advantageous way.
Exactly. And for the last drop, I had a client who had a crypto hedge fund. And they went through everything with the lawyer. They found a very nice jurisdiction, Seychelles, which actually has a very strong hedge fund regulation around it. And then they ended up with me because they couldn't find a bank account. Why? Because it's double red light. It's offshore and it's a hedge fund and it's a crypto as well. So double the triple red flag. So whatever you do legally,
and they do a little porn on the side.
Not make sense. Yeah, exactly. On top of that too, and a bit of gambling too. But jokes aside, yes, it could be very challenging that even though that you do everything legally, client doesn't understand why the banks don't take them, and then that's where we together with the lawyers can actually help and avoid spending a lot of money on a structure which can actually result more tax or more problems or more banking costs on a long term than getting the structure maybe clearer, easier, and in a different jurisdiction.
Yeah. Or even just being able to understanding the business model, understanding the needs of the client, and organizing their business in a way that they wouldn't have thought of, but for the advice that you and a law firm could give, with your combined experience and knowledge.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Victoria, thank you so much for coming on to the Payments Experts podcast. It's been a real pleasure having you. Those listening, Victoria's business, PSP Angels, can be found at pspangels.com. Victoria, we look forward to having you in the future again. This was a great conversation, as well as Jarvis Lagman. Thank you so much for joining us today. And those of you out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast. New episodes, first and third Thursdays. If you're interested in learning more about PEP and how Global Legal Law Firm may be able to assist you, please visit us at globallegallawfirm.com. To schedule a free consultation, give us a call at 888-846-8901 or email us at pep@attorneygl.com. And once again, thank you for listening.
1, 2, 3.